The science of reading is such a hot topic right now in the education world. So hot, in fact, that today's episode of Elevating Early Childhood is going to be split into 2 parts. So without further ado, here's part 1 with special guest Allison McDonald. Are you a pre-K or preschool teacher who's been confused by all the recent information out there about science of reading? I know I was. In today's episode, Allison McDonald and I are going to break it all down for you. But just in case you're not familiar with Allison, let me tell you a little bit about her. Allison is the creator and founder of the wildly popular early childhood website, No Time for Flashcards. She's also the co-author of 2 books, Raising a Rockstar Reader and Setting the Stage for Rockstar Readers. She lives in a yellow farmhouse full of books on an island outside Seattle with her husband and 2 rockstar kids. You know, Allison, I think that we all want to do what's best for our students, right? I think that on the flip side of that, though, is that we as teachers in general, we're afraid of doing the wrong thing for our students, right? So on the one hand, we want to do what's right, but we're also afraid of doing what's wrong. What do you think about that?
I totally agree. I think that in general, most teachers are rule followers. We're not the ones who are we like rules. We're kind of bossy as a group as well, but we definitely want to be doing what is right. And we want a clear set, like a checklist of what it is we're supposed to do, and we will follow it. And unfortunately, teaching is not really a checklist. And That's something that we've definitely discovered with all of this science of reading.
Right. And I feel like because of that reason, because of how some of us feel like we want to do what's right, and we don't want to be told that we're wrong, that what we're seeing now with science of reading is a lot of teachers throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I think that's what you and I are going to delve into on this episode, because I don't want any teacher out there to think everything I've ever done in my whole life and teaching career is wrong and bad, and I'm just going to throw it all out and do this instead, right?
There's no need for that at all.
Yeah.
There's so much that we've all been doing that's right. It's a matter of choosing maybe a few things to focus on a little more and maybe a few things to focus on a little less. But really, none of this was groundbreaking for me at all. The deeper I dove into science of reading and the research that informs it was all review and, oh, great. I found a few new great strategies for sure, but that's it.
Right. And I feel the same way. I feel like when you really take it below just the surface level, right? On the surface, it looks like, oh my gosh, they're just blowing everything I ever know and did out of the water. But when you actually get down into it and look into the research and everything, it's a lot of affirmation at the early childhood level, at the preschool and pre-K level. I really feel like it's a lot of affirmation that a lot of the things that we have always done and considered best practice in early childhood, and we'll get more into those details in a few minutes, but I feel like it's an affirmation that we're on the right track. And with a few tweaks, we can make what we're doing already even better.
Exactly. I love the word tweaks, because that's really what it is. When I look at the books that I've been reading and the research that I've been reading, it's tweaks. Like the stuff I highlight is, okay, I'm going to make sure I do that. Okay, right. I'm going to do more of this and maybe a little less of that. Right. And I think the other thing is that it's really easy to think that science of reading is a really prescribed curriculum. If someone is telling you that, they're wrong. They don't know what it is. All that science of reading is really using research, both educational research, cognitive, neuroscience, to inform our practice, which I feel like early childhood is really fantastic at doing that already. We're already if we are using a developmentally appropriate approach, we're already using research to inform our practice. We don't use a lot of scripted curriculum, whereas a lot of elementary teachers have to. They don't have a choice. A lot of us have a lot more choice and autonomy, which is awesome because then we can be free to do that. And so a lot of this wasn't new stuff for me at all. And I don't think any early childhood teacher, preschool or pre-K, needs to be really, really worried that they have to start from scratch, because they don't.
Right. And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat as I was looking into this, and I will just say really quickly that we are using a lot of what we're talking about from this book, Shifting the Balance, 6 Ways to Bring the Science of Reading into the Balanced Literacy Classroom by Berkins and Yates. And I think that is a really great book because it really set my mind at ease. And that's kind of where I got a lot of the affirmations from. I think they've done a really fantastic job of breaking it down for us and also letting us know what I really liked about it. I don't know about you, Allison, but is it let us know what things we should be responsible for in preschool and pre-K and what things should happen in kinder and up. And so I think when they made that clear delineation and they do that with tables and charts and stuff, that's when I said, this is the book that I want to use as a basis for our discussion, because that's what our people want to hear, I think.
Yes, definitely. I really liked it. I definitely highlighted the things when they were saying things like, leave that for kindergarten. And of course, all of us know that we have to teach the child in front of us. So there's always going to be some wiggle room either way, but it's good to know what your planned practice is going to be. This is going to be my planned practice with asterisks if need be. Right. And they did a great job of that.
Yes. And one of the first things I noticed in the book that really made me enjoy the book from the get-go was they talked about the importance of oral language development. And I, at that point, was hooked because I was like, well, that is one of the 4 factors that determines future literacy success, oral language. I've been a proponent of oral language forever and a day, and I'm constantly advocating that teachers make sure that their children have time to build those oral language skills through peer-to-peer conversations. And we do that a lot at the preschool level with centers and other things. What do you think, Allison?
I think that's really important. I think it's important. One of the things that they really stressed too was that a lot of people are taking the idea that science of reading means only explicit instruction, only phonics, and it's not at all. And they're forgetting read alouds. They're forgetting using complex texts. This is what a lot of people are taking from science reading. It's not what science reading is saying. It's definitely not what the authors in the book are saying either. We are so quick to throw away what isn't being highlighted instead of saying, okay, this is highlighted because there hasn't been enough of this. We still need this. And their focus on oral language, development of content and background knowledge through interactions and through read alouds and through peer-to-peer. So important. And one of the things that really struck me about oral language, and I wrote down because as I was reading this book and other books like Speech to Print, which I read as well, I was always putting in the margins, how would I use that in my class? Okay, I teach pre-K. How would I use this specific skill or specific need for literacy? How would that look in my class? And so one of the things with oral language is I do a teacher table, which sometimes is just me and a student. Sometimes it's me and it's small group, really. But that's really a time to work on that child or those children's skills. And I am going to explicitly teach some vocabulary this year at that table. I'm not a checklist person, but I've been teaching 2 and 3-year-olds for years. I have to go back to when I was teaching pre-K before and really think, do you know what? This is some time for some explicit instruction and some really intentional oral language development. And we can use those vocabulary words from our read alouds, from our centers. This should all come together. We can be intentional and also be developmentally appropriate. They are not opposing forces.
Right. You know what else struck me about the oral language part, Allison, was if anybody out there listening in listener land has to advocate for more play in their classroom, this would be the perfect piece of science of reading to pull forward, because we know that children develop strong oral language skills by talking to each other and having the time to talk. So now if you need to defend play in your classroom, you can use this piece. If you're following science of reading in your school, if your school is making you take all the science of reading training, even though you're in preschool or pre-K, all you have to do now is pull it out and say, look, oral language, this is one of the most important things that we can be doing for our children. And so therefore we do need center time, and we do need more recess time, and we need, whatever. You can just use it as in your defense.
I love that you brought that up, because that is so true. That is so true, because that is when do you hear your students talking to each other? When do you hear them using what they learned at Read Aloud or using what they learned at a teacher table and actually doing it? When they're playing pretend. I see my students writing when they're playing restaurant. I see my students talking to each other saying, which kind do you like? Which kind do you like? They're not doing that at circle time.
Right.
They're doing that when they play.
Right. Yeah, I think that's just that was one of the most powerful things I took away in that portion of the book. There's many other portions, but your comment about vocabulary too. I want to touch on that, because I think a lot of us, when we think of vocabulary, at least I do. Maybe that's just me. I shouldn't put it on anyone else, but I think of like memorizing words and having spelling tests and giving definitions. And this was in much higher grades, obviously, than preschool. But I think that when it comes to vocabulary, I like to look at the work of Dr. Isabel Beck. She did a lot on vocabulary, and somebody that I've studied over the years. And it's just basically being intentional, finding the words in the picture books that you already read aloud that are those high utility words, those words that are going to build that background knowledge in that academic language, highlighting those. It's really not a whole other thing, right? Like, you don't have to sit down and plan a vocabulary lesson. Like, how am I going to do that in between teaching science and math and literacy and having recess and lunch and snack and nap? Like, I don't think it's another thing you add on your plate. You're just more intentional about how you do it.
That's it, is that it's more intentional. And one of the things they said in the book that I think I messaged you about was saying that one of the things they do is use a group of texts. Now, I'm not talking about decodable readers right now. Throw that out. That's for older kids. I'm talking about like a book list. So say we're learning about volcanoes. Well, I'm also going to have Harry and the Hot Lava. I'm going to have volcanoes, volcanoes, volcanoes. Those are independent books. I'm choosing one book to read at circle time. Those are books my students can choose, and words from that can pop up in my science center. Words can pop up literacy. They can pop up all over the place when we're outside. Guys, the ground is lava. We can learn in so many ways with intention without having to really prescribe it all. There's a difference between prescribed and intention.
Right. Absolutely. And I think you just hit on this. Now, Allison referenced that we'd been messaging each other. We have been geeking out over this topic for several weeks now, because when I started this podcast, one of the things that I wanted to do was to talk about hot topics in early childhood education. And so when I was narrowing down the topics and referencing my guest list of people that I wanted, I knew that I had to have Allison on for this episode. And so the minute I mentioned it to her, we started messaging back and forth. Have you read this? Have you seen this? Can you believe this? Look at this. I mean, it was it was nonstop back and forth, and it was great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and we were sharing screenshots from the book and just did, look at this, what they said here. But one of the things you just touched on, I think, I want to go down that rabbit hole for a minute. So you're talking, let's say you said you were learning about volcanoes. Is that what you said?
Yes.
So let's take that. Let's say that's part of a broader theme you're doing, maybe in the prehistoric era or something. I don't know. And you're talking about kind of incorporating that vocabulary throughout your classroom. Could one then infer from that we could do a theme, perhaps, or unit of study?
Well, and because themes and unit of study, when you're using that, guess what you're building? Background knowledge. And we know that background knowledge is a very important foundation for success with literacy. And so I know there are a ton of different ways of attacking is probably the wrong word, but practicing early childhood education. There are a lot of people that really, truly believe that we just have to let children play. Now, there are also a lot of people that want to put them in desks and not let them play at all. And I am absolutely a middle ground person. I'm a middle ground with everything. There's a great quote by, I think it's Pearson, who says that he is radically in the middle. And that is me with a lot of things, because I see the good and the bad with everything. And if we swing too far anywhere, it is not going to get us anywhere when we need to be right here. And so I have to say that themes are so important. There's a lot of people that don't want to use themes in early childhood, but it makes sense. It makes sense with vocabulary. It makes sense with background knowledge. It makes sense to give our students multiple opportunities to dive into content because we know that content helps them with literacy, and literacy is something they will not pick up on their own. Right. Despite what people want to say, right. That's not true.
Right.
We know that reading is not a natural process. Yeah. Language is, reading is not. And so we need to give them these foundations. And as early childhood educators, that's our job. Our lane is foundations. And we are going to give them strong foundations by offering them a chance to dive into content in multiple ways. And how wonderful is it that we often have centers? We can do that. And it doesn't mean that we never do another activity a different day and we only focus on this one thing, but just give them multiple opportunities.
Yeah. And I also don't subscribe to the osmosis theory that children just learn by absorbing the environment around them. I think that there has to be a balance struck as well. So we're like in that regard. And I think that also you were talking about having a unit of study, giving young children multiple opportunities to experience words or vocabulary in their environment. So I think that's also another way to look at it. So if you're looking at the vocabulary aspect of science of reading and how it relates to how children build background knowledge and how background knowledge then informs the way that they learn or their ability to read later. They have to have the word for something in their head before they can actually read the word. If you've never seen the word meatballs before, then, and you've never had a meatball and you've never experienced a meatball, then, seeing this word in print you're not going to have that reference, right? I'm not saying do a unit on meatballs, right, though, by the way.
Right. You could decode the word, but it won't have any meaning if you don't know what it is.
Exactly. Yes. And I think the authors used an example about reading in Spanish, which I thought was really, really insightful because I can also read Spanish. I did not fully grasp the meaning of what I was reading. And so that really drove the point home for me because I'm not conversationally fluent. I'm just moderately what I call baby fluent. So I was like, oh, that is absolutely right. Just because I could read it, because I can read Spanish, doesn't mean that I can comprehend it. So
exactly.
It's the vocabulary, it's the oral language development. Those are the things I don't have in Spanish. And so I think that having that rich experience throughout the different, what should I call them? The academic areas of subject matter that you're teaching, having that connection just creates multiple opportunities for children to experience those words. And research actually supports that. The more the children have the opportunity to interact with that word, the more likely they're to incorporate it into their own vocabulary, to start using it. And so I thought that was great for that as well. And I think that's one of those subtle nuances that if you just take science of reading at face value, that you're not going to get.
I agree. And the thing is too, thinking about early childhood, it doesn't, like, most of us use at least some level of emergent curriculum. And I definitely do. You can still do units of study with emergent curriculum. You can still see where your students are and put a theme to it, or insert those vocabulary words. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're now planning everything out months before. I never do. I never plan that far ahead, because I need to know where my students are. And so I don't want teachers to think, oh gosh, this is also all old school again. Let's go back to old school. That's not what this is. We're using research to inform our practice, but we can still be developmentally appropriate. We can still have emergent. We can still have plenty of play, lots of play, and also meet their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we know that some of the basic foundations of what we do in preschool, the things that are super important to us as early childhood professionals, now that we know that some of those things, well, most of them are still very relevant and in fact should still be done in the classroom, let's turn our attention now to some of the things that we might be able to tweak or make a shift in the way we teach. What can we do differently going forward? What are your takeaways on that, Allison?
When I was thinking about what to do differently moving forward, I think kind of the main thing was really focusing more on sounds than I was before. So often in early childhood, we think we need to teach them the letter names and then it's sounds. But we need to kind of move that around a bit. We need to do more phonological awareness. And that's the thing. So if you are reading this book, on page, I think you sent me on page 48, it says here that phonemic awareness should be instructional priority over phonological awareness. But I want people to make sure they read page 46 before that, where it also says that ideally children will participate in a lot of phonological awareness practice in preschool. And you can jump into phonemic awareness lessons at the beginning of kindergarten. So, as early childhood educators, really our main lane here is phonological awareness with some focus on phonemic awareness. So, one of the things I really stepped away from with this is really the focus so much on rhyming and alliteration and syllable blending. And very interestingly, I thought syllable blending was a higher level activity than it really is. And maybe it was just me, there's a lot for us to know. It doesn't matter how long we've been doing this, we can forget something. But a 2004 study showed syllable blending was easier an activity than a lot of the other activities. So, I meant to get that's okay. I had a puppet. I was going to actually show one of the things that I'm going to incorporate. So I have I thought he was up here. I have a little mouse puppet and I call him Quinn. And one of the things I'm going to do with him this year is we are going to do some syllable blending. And so Quiet Quinn doesn't say his words quickly enough. Can you help Quiet Quinn say his words more quickly? Table. How would you say that? And my students will say table. Now, what about toothbrush? Toothbrush. Yes. What about elephant? Elephant. Yes. So that was actually a activity that I took straight from speech to print, which by Motes, Louisa Cook Motes. And it was specifically for preschoolers. And it is backed by research that 4 and 5-year-olds absolutely should and can do this activity. So I have not tried it yet, but that is one of the things that I'm going to focus more on. So syllable clapping, we like to clap out names. That's still very important. Alliteration. I have made myself sound cards with pictures so that there's no letters on it. I had a lot of requests when I had offered this up as a printable on my site. A lot of people, but there are no letters. Should I write the letters? No, we are focusing on sounds with this. This is all about sounds. This is not about letters yet. This is just about sounds. And so I have, actually, I think I have them here. Hold on. The good thing about having a messy office is I've got them. So I've got all my sound cards here in a little thing. And so when I introduce a sound, I then have like noodles, net. So obviously these are all the N sound, nose. And I am going to have a whole bunch of the sound I am working on and just a few of the sound that isn't, because it's a very, very strong instructional practice to do is versus isn't. And so this is another thing that I'm going to be focusing more on. We're going to focus less on matching the letter to the sound. We're going to focus on discriminating the sound, hearing sounds. And of course, we're still going to focus on letter names. Research absolutely supports that children that know letter names have better reading outcomes. So don't throw that out. That's still very, very important.
Yes. I really like how you pointed out that, phonological awareness is still what we're all about. The four factors that determine future reading success have not changed due to science of reading. Those four factors are still concepts of print, alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, and oral language. Those things still there, still good.
And that's part of what they share in science of reading. They still share that. Right. Science of reading is just using all of the research that we have.
Right.
And it's very possible that some teachers watching right now have been doing exactly what they are asking us to do this whole time.
Right. That is an important point, because I felt like when I started reading the book, or looking into just in general, reading a lot of articles about science of reading, I felt like, and I know you and I have talked about this, but I felt like, who hasn't been doing this stuff? Like, who hasn't been doing phonological awareness? So it's kind of like that time, and I've told this story a million times, but there's this time when my principal, we had a laminator in the teacher's workroom, right? Everyone uses the laminator, right? We had one teacher who had really long, beautiful blonde hair. She was very, very tiny, and she went to use the laminator, and she got her hair stuck in the laminating machine. And it was a big debacle. They had to cut her hair to get it out. The laminating machine was ruined. And therefore, we all lost the privilege of using the laminating machine. And I feel that's
you just put your hair back.
I know. And I feel that's kind of like the science of reading, right? It's like, y'all were doing everything wrong. In my best Texas voice, y'all were doing everything wrong, and y'all better get it right from now on. When in fact, it really wasn't all of us. I felt like we were being blamed for things that I was like, who isn't teaching phonological awareness? Who doesn't do nursery rhymes? Like, who's that? So I feel like we have to release ourselves from that feeling of being blamed. Are there teachers out there who weren't focusing on it as much because of the curriculums they were being told to use? Maybe
that was the point I wanted to say. Exactly. So often when teachers aren't doing something, it's not because we haven't been taught it, although this has shown that some teacher prep programs are definitely deficient. There needs to be work there, but that's a whole nother podcast. It's usually because the scripted curriculum with a pace and scope that the teacher doesn't get to choose is the one with the holes in it and the gaps in it.
Right.
And that's a whole nother issue as well. It's not usually because the teacher. So even I know that my son's kindergarten teacher did zoophonics with them, even though the program they were using didn't require it, because she knew. And so then there's a whole equity piece too. Like schools that have teachers that have been there for 30 years often have the autonomy and the knowledge to continue doing it. Whereas a brand new teacher is going to be that rule follower because they have to be. Your job depends on it.
Right.
So I really do feel like especially for early childhood, the more I dive into it, the more I realize most of us seem to be checking off the boxes.
Right.
We seem to be doing pretty well here. And
Right.
don't be scared to look into it. You're not going to have to change everything. I think sometimes teachers are scared to find out because then if they know, they have to change.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
There's not going to be a lot of changes. Don't worry.
Right.
Just look into it.
That's it for part 1 of this Science of Reading deep dive with Allison McDonald. Tune in next week where we'll bring you part 2. Onward and upward.